afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time of day you happen to be tuning in. We are so grateful that the Lord has afforded us this privileged opportunity to continue and actually culminate our Black History Month celebration with our youth ministry. Our young people have been working to bring this together along with the supervisors and other of the adults and parents that have worked with our young people. And we're excited about what it is that we're about to present to you. In all of our understanding and appreciation of Black history, we can sometimes neglect to consider the fact that there's Black history all around us, that we are Black history as we move forward and create a legacy for our children and grandchildren to emulate. So again, we say God bless you. Let us thank the Lord for what He has done for us and for us as a people as we again celebrate Black history with our youth ministry. Let's pray. Father, how we thank you for this precious privilege of being able to celebrate and commemorate the great legacy and the great history that you have granted us as Black people. We ask, oh God, that you would be with us and in our midst as we do indeed celebrate and reflect on that which we have done by your grace and that which you have brought to pass in the lives of all of your people. It is in the name of Jesus the Christ that we pray and ask it all. Amen. God bless you.
About 5 million African Americans migrated out of the southern United States between 1940 and 1970, an exodus known as the Second Great Migration. In today's presentation, you will see generational diversity as we pair our youth with older members to discuss their journey from their southern state to California. Sit back, relax, and grab a snack and watch how we bring Black history to life by focusing on those around us. Enjoy.
Following the Civil War, African Americans had hopes of racial equality and pathways to a different life than they had previously known. During Reconstruction, between 1865 and 1877, attempts were made to correct the inequities of slavery and its political, social, and economic legacy. Reconstruction witnessed far-reaching changes in America's political life. At the national level, new laws and constitutional amendments permanently altered the federal system and the definition of American citizenship. The passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution granted Black Americans the same legal protections as white Americans. However, after 1877 and the election of Republican Rutherford B. Hayes as president, Southern and border states began restricting the liberties of Black people. The highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, undermined the new constitutional protections afforded to Black people with the infamous Plessy v. Ferguson case, which legitimized Jim Crow laws and the Jim Crow way of life. Many states in the South passed Jim Crow statutes, severely regulating social interactions between the races. Signs were placed above water fountains, door entrances and exits, and in front of public facilities. There were separate hospitals for Black people and white people, separate prisons, separate public and private schools, separate churches, separate cemeteries, separate public restrooms, and separate public accommodations. In most instances, the Black facilities were grossly inferior, generally older and less well kept. In other cases, there were no Black facilities, no colored public restroom, no public beach, no place to sit or eat. The Plessy decision gave Jim Crow states a legal way to ignore their constitutional obligations to their Black citizens. Unable to work and create stable financial households, and ready to escape the hostile and blatantly racist systems in the southern United States, 1.6 million African Americans left mostly rural areas, migrating to northern industrial cities from 1916 to 1940. This first wave of northern and midwestern moves has been referred to as the Great Migration. It increased the Black population in those areas by as much as 40% by 1930. With the increase of the Black population in major cities, racial tensions grew eventually resulting in race riots during the Red Summer of 1919 in many cities, notably Washington, D.C., Chicago, Illinois, Omaha, Nebraska, Knoxville, Tennessee, and Elaine, Arkansas. By the end of 1919, there were over 60 documented race riots between white and black people across the United States. Against this backdrop of racial tensions and violence in many areas and a precarious social status, African Americans continued in search of greater economic prospects until the Great Depression squeezed opportunities for all in the industrial cities. As the nation's financial stability improved, African Americans continued to leave the South in staggering numbers. From the 1940s to the 1970s, over 5 million black people left the 14 states in the South, especially Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and Georgia, from the Northeast, Midwest, and now the West, in what is now known as the Second Great Migration. Again motivated by the search for better economic opportunities and a desire to escape the blatant hostile racism of Jim Crow, this time, many made their way west to Los Angeles. The black population in Los Angeles leaped from 63,700 in 1940 to 763,000 in 1970. While life in Los Angeles was not perfect, it afforded many exactly what they were looking for in the way of economic opportunities and a break from overt racism. Today, we will hear first-hand accounts from some of those that migrated.
The Power of a Dream. The legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stands as a model of courage and sacrifice in the service of justice. His words, while powerful and inspiring, are especially meaningful because they still ring true today. Dr. King maintained a vision for a diverse America where all people enjoy the benefits of equality. His dream has long stood as a shared goal for individual freedom and collective responsibility. On August 28, 1963, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., he spoke, "Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children." In 1951, Langston Hughes wrote, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?" On November 4th, 2008, Barack Obama was elected the 44th president and became the first African-American chief executive of the United States. In his victory speech, President Obama remarked that change has come to America. For many, the election of President Obama can be viewed as fulfillment of Dr. King's dream. Full access to America's promises are within reach, but the work continues.
Good evening. My name is Ethan Price. I'm an 8th grader at Mayfield Junior School, and today we are learning about the second migration of African Americans from the South through firsthand accounts from those that were a part of that migration. I have the privilege of talking with Reverend Harold M. Pittman. Many may know him as the Minister of Music at Greater Ebenezer. Excuse me. He has been a member of GEMBCLA since 1978 and an associate minister since 1993. Welcome, Reverend Pittman.
Thank you, Brother Ethan. I'm honored. Thank you so much for asking me.
Please share with us your background, where you're from, family structure, and any other information about your hometown.
I was born and I grew up in a little town of Anniston, Alabama, which is about 60 miles northeast of Birmingham. And the reason I mention Birmingham is because most people associate problems in the South or the South with Birmingham, which is at the largest city. And I grew up in a family of seven siblings with two sisters and four brothers. I was the fifth and youngest child. I attended elementary and high school, all in Anniston, Alabama. So I remember it well.
All righty. What did you know about the civil rights movement in the 1960s? And were you ever personally involved in any aspect of it?
I was certainly aware of the civil rights movement in the 60s because obviously so much was going on in our state and neighboring states. There was violence, there was murders, there was the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. And Dr. King certainly came to prominence from Alabama, and it was kind of in our face. While it wasn't necessarily in our little town, it was so close to us that we couldn't be removed from what was going on. And when I was in school in Knoxville, Tennessee, as a part of the civil rights movement, we picketed and marched to be permitted to have equal seating in the local theaters. While we didn't have dogs sicked on us or water hoses aimed at us, we took the abuse, the vocal abuse from the local whites. And of course, it wasn't easy to take some of that, but we agreed that we were not going to fight back. And that, looking back, it has paid off. Dr. King was right. We have to be nonviolent, and Jesus said it best: turn the other cheek. It saddens me to know that still people can be as vicious as they were in some instances.
Yeah. What was the motivation for your move to California?
Well, basically, my desire to finish education and, of course, be gainfully employed. In the South in those days, there was really not much in the way of employment expectations for Blacks, because if you could find a job, it was probably in a foundry or and of course the pay was far from what we needed. My father, just as an example, worked as a machinist in a foundry for 30 years at about half the pay of what whites were making doing the same jobs. So I certainly couldn't see myself working in a foundry and playing the piano. You can imagine that wouldn't go over very well. But coming to California was just my move to try and better myself, to make my way and be gainfully employed.
How different was it out here compared to your hometown? Do you regret leaving the South, and have you considered moving back?
Well, I certainly regretted at that time leaving the South because I was leaving my parents. And when I say leaving my parents, I was moving away. And from Alabama to California, you can imagine the separation anxieties that I must have gone through. But my father, one day, a gentleman came to our door and somewhat insulted my mother. And I reacted in a way that was not so nice. Uh, Pastor would have given me a name, but at any rate, I didn't react with that young man who was my age at that time, by the way.
Right.
And after the exchange, my father said to me in so many words, you need to go away from here, because if you don't, you're going to kill somebody or somebody's going to kill you. That was, I smile about it now, but it wasn't so funny in those days. But that plus knowing that I needed to go to a place where I could probably get a better state of employment was my impetus for coming to California.
Would you mind sharing your experience living in Los Angeles? Were you surprised or disappointed by what you found when you arrived?
Well, I can't say that I was disappointed. I certainly found it a better situation than I had lived in Alabama. But California had its own problems. There was segregation wasn't so much in your face as it was you were manipulated in different ways. You were paid just enough to keep you quiet in so many ways. I worked for many years for an insurance company where, as my father had experienced, I experienced not being paid what the whites doing the same jobs were being paid. And at the beginning of it, I was unaware that they were being paid more for the same job until I became a manager. And then, of course, things kind of changed a little bit. Looking back, I did have a little bit more equity in pay for the work that I did. But California is cost a lot more to live in than Alabama. But there's no comparison as far as I'm concerned. I wouldn't, and I did not go back. And I was happy that my parents, well, I wasn't happy that my father died, but I was happy that my mother moved away, so I didn't have to carry any kind of a guilt trip about her being there and me being here. In my early years of living in California, I experienced the Watts riots in 1962. And those riots were, it seemed, an explosion of what people were experiencing. The Blacks had had enough. The riots were so that we could have some economic equity, if you will. In 1992, you probably know it best as the reaction after the whites that were accused of beating Rodney King, and they were exonerated. And of course, the town went kind of nuts. But that's more recent history. But the riots were a lot less than a picnic. I think it's been exploited to be shown as something that was exciting, but it was frightening. I remember in 1992, we were on our way home from a rehearsal at the church when the riot started. And it took us about a half hour to drive from Greater Ebenezer to our home. And that trip should have taken maybe about 10 minutes because we had to go around fires and around people shooting their guns and what have you. It was a very frightening time. That's as close to violence in that kind of thing that I experienced. I didn't expect that in California. I certainly didn't have that much violence around me in Alabama, but it happened, and it's more recent history.
Yeah. This has been so informative. Thank you for sharing your story, and I hope that others will find it as enlightening as I have.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you so much for asking me.
You're welcome.
All right.
The power of media. In 1963 Birmingham, Alabama's population was 40% black, but the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called it probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Between 1945 and 1962, the city had been nicknamed Bombingham because of the more than 50 racially motivated bombings. Laws carried over from the Jim Crow era barred black people from most good-paying jobs, while segregation in the form of colored-only signs at public water fountains and restrooms was strictly enforced. Because of poll taxes and rigid literacy tests, fewer than 10% of Birmingham's black population was registered to vote. In early 1963, the Birmingham Movement, a campaign of nonviolent action organized by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, culminated in widely publicized confrontations between young black students and white civic authorities. The May 4th, 1963 cover of New York Times featured a new iconic photo of a 17-year-old civil rights demonstrator attacked by a police dog in Birmingham under the direction of a police commissioner, Eugene Bull Connor. This photograph played a critical role in the civil rights movement. National media coverage of the brutal police tactics on television and on the front pages of newspapers horrified much of the catalysts for major social and legal change and contributed the passage of Civil Rights Act in 1964. 57 years later, on May 25, 2020, a cell phone captured by a bystander showed millions around the world of the interaction between George Perry Floyd Jr. and Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. The disturbing video incited protests against police brutality and systematic racism in Minneapolis and more than 150 American cities in the months that followed, leading to a nationwide racial justice movement not seen since the civil rights protests of the 1960s. Civil rights organizations such as the NAACP, Black Lives Matter, National Action Network, and countless others continue to apply pressure and elevate crucial conversations nationally. In 1965, on the steps of the state capitol in Montgomery, Alabama, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stated, "How long? Not long, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We have made tremendous progress in the fight for equality, but the work continues."
Good afternoon. My name is Taylor Langford. I am a sophomore at West Ranch High School, and today we will be learning about the second great migration of African Americans from the South through firsthand accounts from those who were part of the migration. I am very excited to spend time with Sister Virginia Williams. She is a longtime member of GMBCLA, joining in 1966, and has been active in a number of ministries over the years. Welcome, Sister Williams.
Thank you, Taylor.
Please share with us some of your background.
Well, I was born in El Dorado, Arkansas. I come from a family of 11 children. There were 2 sets of twins, 1 set of triplets, and 4 single births. I was the 10th child, and I am a twin. I attended Watson Elementary School and Washington High School, and I was very active in high school. I was a member of the National Honor Society. I was a debutante, a member of the choir, and I was a member of a vocal ensemble called the Tonettes. And I enjoyed music very much. And I come from a community where there was a lot of oil companies there in El Dorado. And I lived in a closed community. My schools were segregated, and they began to integrate my senior year. We had the opportunity, we could either remain at our high school or we could go to the white school. And I chose to stay at Washington until my senior year to graduate. And then after graduation, the same month of graduation, I left coming to California with one of my classmates. I came to Los Angeles and he went to Oakland. And I came to California, not that I was interested in really coming. I was wanted to stay home with my mother. However, she encouraged me to leave for better opportunities. And my older sister was here and she wanted me to come to live with her. So I migrated to Los Angeles in 1966.
Thank you for sharing that with us. As you said, before you migrated to Los Angeles for better opportunities, in your hometown, how much were you aware of what was happening with civil rights movements in other parts of the South?
Well, I knew about the civil rights movement because when I was 9 years old, the capital, Little Rock, Arkansas, there was a time when they were getting ready to integrate Central High School. And the governor was, thought was Faubus, and he had sent out National Guards to keep them from integrating. And so that was a big, commotion during that time. And the president of the United States at the time was Dwight Eisenhower. So he nationalized the National Guards in order to protect the 9 students that were integrating Central. And we were aware, of the civil rights movement because our teachers, kept us informed and we had to discuss it in school, about things that was going on. And I know that in 1960, I think it was 65, when, the Selma's March. And so we were always aware of the discrimination and things that was going on, around the country. And because I grew up, they're telling me about, Emmett Till, being thrown in the Mississippi River. And we were always taught about the lynching and things that happened. And they kept us very close. We were not allowed to go out of the community too much. They allowed our brothers, they could leave home and go out and stuff, but the girls had to stay in. They were very protective of us because we knew what was going on. And we were not allowed, to go to downtown. There were just certain things we were not allowed to do, and during that time too, they still had places where you could not drink water out of a fountain that a white person was drinking out. So we were aware of discrimination and stuff going on. What a difference. Thank God for today.
Yes. Well, what were the motivations of you moving to California?
I did not understand that.
What were the motivations of you moving to California?
Better opportunities. Okay, because most of the jobs there for Blacks were domestic. They worked in white people homes, and my mother wanted me to, have a better life. And that was different. Our parents always wanted our lives to be different than theirs. And so I came to California and I had quite a few different jobs when I got to California. I worked at the dry cleaners. I worked at a zipper factory. And let's see. And after that, I think after the zipper factory, that's when I went to work for the bank. So I worked in banking for 17 years and I worked for LAUSD for 14 years. And that's where I retired from LAUSD.
Would you mind sharing your experience about living in Los Angeles? Were you surprised or disappointed in what you found when you arrived?
What surprised me was the interacting with other people. Like living in a closed community, everybody knew everybody. And so we were very neighborly. When I got to California, people very rarely spoke to one another, and you very rarely knew who your neighbor was. And it was different for me because you were locked up all the time when I got to California, they're making sure, things are locked up. And it was so much more relaxed in Arkansas. So that was different for me. And we were used to speaking to one another. And when I spoke to people here, when I first got here, they looked at me real funny, like, what's wrong with you? And so I got used to that. But then I learned how not to speak. When I started working for the bank, I would like to say that I got the job because I was recommended from my boss. And I find that, how God is always in the plan. And I remember that when I left that position, I worked in Calabasas at the time, and my former boss asked me if I wanted to move to downtown Los Angeles. Was naturally I did, because I lived in Los Angeles. And I thank God, because whenever you put forth an effort, I found that when you do what you're supposed to do, that God does the rest. And I made sure that when I went to work, I went to work, and that I did not take advantage of, the things that were given to me. When it was time to go to lunch, I went to lunch, I took my breaks, and I came back when I was supposed to. And as I grew up, it went up the corporate ladder, I treated people the way I wanted to be treated. And whenever, there were projects we had to do, I joined right in with my group. And when I left, my boss called me and told me, he said that your employees, they came to my office and cried and asked, could I come back? And I was, so grateful that, the opportunity was given to me, and that, I made an impression in people's life.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I am very blessed to learn so much more about you and have this time to talk with you personally.
Thank you.
The power of the vote. The struggle over voting rights in the United States has a long history in this country. In 1868, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution granted African Americans the right of citizenship. However, this did not always translate into the ability to vote. Despite legal ability to vote, Black voters were systematically turned away from the ballot box. To address this problem, Congress passed the 15th Amendment in 1870, which provides the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Even with both 14th and 15th Amendments, individual states still found a way to prevent Blacks from voting. Poll taxes, literacy, test frauds, and intimidation were very successful tactics used to prevent Blacks from casting their votes in elections. Until the Supreme Court struck it down in 1915, many states used the grandfather clause to keep descendants of slaves out of elections. The clause said you could not vote unless your grandfather had voted, an impossibility for many people whose ancestors were slaves. Prior to 1965, only an estimated 23% of voting age Blacks were registered nationally. For years, brave and impassioned African Americans protested, marched, and were arrested, and even died working toward voting equality. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 prohibited racial discrimination in voting. It was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson during the height of the Civil Rights Movement on August 6, 1965, and was later amended by Congress 5 times to expand its protections. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the act is considered to be the most effective piece of federal rights legislation ever enacted in this country. It is also one of the most far-reaching pieces of civil rights legislation in U.S. history. Currently, Republican-controlled states have enacted bills that are designed to suppress voting in federal elections, especially among Black, Hispanics, and poor voters. State-endorsed voting restrictions and redistricting battles often target communities of color by diluting community voting stress and placing unnecessary obstacles in the way of Black voters. The John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act of 2021 seeks to address these issues at the federal level. The act is named for the civil rights activist and politician best known for his leadership of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and for leading the March on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, in 1965, also known as Bloody Sunday. You can help in this fight. Make your voice heard by making sure you are registered to vote and by letting your elected officials know how you want them to lead. Remember, the work continues.
Good afternoon. My name is Camille Porter. I am a sixth grader at Wilders Preparatory Academy, and today we are learning about the second Great Migration of African Americans from the South through first-hand accounts from those that were a part of that migration. I have the privilege of talking with Sister Leola Johnson. She has been a member of Greater Ebenezer since 1957, and she's 96 years old. Welcome, Sister Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please share with us about your background.
All right. I was born in Taylortown, Louisiana, on a plantation. I was born on a plantation. And we had to pick cotton and we had to chop cotton. And we had to do a lot of things out in the field. But by me being a small child, I couldn't do all of that type of work. So my grandmother and my mother, they always brought me to home because I had asthma. But we went to schools down in Taylor. We didn't go to school there. After we moved from Taylortown, from the plantation, then we went to school up into another top place, little place. But all of my life, I spent half of it on the plantation. Young life, that was the young life. I spent half of it on the plantation. And then when we moved from the plantation, we went to Shreveport, Louisiana, and got a little job and stayed there for a while. And after we stayed in Shreveport, Louisiana, then we they told us that they had jobs in California. And so we decided to come to California in 1940. I believe it was in 1940, 40 something, 46. And we came and we stayed in California for a long time. I'm still here now. Mm-hmm.
What did you expect to find when you moved to California?
Well, the things that first thing I was looking for better health. And I thank God that he brought me to California because it's a dry country, because Louisiana was a wet and cold country. So we come to California where it was nice and dry and I could get better jobs. And I had, and the weather was better. So I really did enjoy coming to California.
Can you share more of your experience living in California?
Well, after I got to California, the children's father and got better jobs, and he went to work out in Cherryfield or someplace up in Bakersfield. Then he came back and got a job at Long Beach Shipyard. Then we bought us a little house down on 56 in Compton. But it was so much better in California because I could go to school. Well, I should have said this before. I went to school back in Louisiana with only one teacher, and she was a black teacher. Her name was Miss Ball, and she had 4 classes. She had a first grade, second grade, and those books was given to us by the white people because they had better books, and they were all raggedy books, but that's the only books we had. And we could only go to school for 2 months. So we couldn't go to school for 2 months because we had to come out and go to the field on that plantation and pick cotton and corn and sugar cane. We had a lot of things. And so that's why when we got to California, everybody was talking and everybody was good. And I just thank the Lord that we could meet people and talk to people and didn't have to go around to the back door to buy the food because you couldn't buy food in this market. We had to go to the back door in Louisiana. But here in Los Angeles, I had better health, better place to stay, and a better job because I got a job at one place, but I call it the Lowe's Drive-In, and the next place I worked at the Veteran Administration for 26 years. So I like California the best. California was a better place to stay because we had a lot of jobs to go to, and we could stay on those jobs, and we didn't have to go in the back door. We didn't have to go to the fountains to drink water, the black fountains, and we didn't have in California, but back in Louisiana, we had to go to the black fountains. We had to go in the back of the grocery store. We just didn't have nothing in common with California. And California was a better place for us to come and live with my children and they good education here. I didn't get a good education. I only could go to school for 2 months.
During the Watts riots, where were you?
Well, we were here at 42nd Street because we moved here in 57. We moved to 4208. I mean 2029. We moved to 2029 in 1957. And the Watts riots was just about over. So we was out of it. It was over. Well, we moved here in 59, 57, 59. You have to excuse me a little while until I get my little idea. Then we moved to 42nd Street. And I've been here from 57 up until now. And then I got my grandchildren here now. And I went to church. I got into the church under Lot. And after I come out from under him, I went under the Lot Pastor Drake. And now I have a new pastor, and his name is Pastor Porter. So everything in Los Angeles is better than it was. Yeah.
How different was it out here compared to your hometown? Do you regret leaving the South, and have you considered moving back?
No, ma'am. I do not regret moving from the South because the South brought all us trouble, and we couldn't go to church as much as we went to church, but we wasn't as freely going to churches as we are out here in California. But we had churches all around us, small, little, it didn't hold over 15 people, but we had churches and we had some Bibles, not many Bibles. So that's why I like California better than I did Louisiana.
Can you share any particular experiences with racism?
Yes, I can say that we did not go to a mixed school. We only had two books, a speller and a reader. And our teachers could only give us about 50, well, at that time, we didn't have clocks, but then didn't have radios and didn't have television. But at that time, she could only give us about 5 or 6 minutes per student. We had no drinking water. We had to drink water from the bucket. And the white, if they didn't like what we were doing in the school, they would come by and throw it out, turn our drinking water away from us. So we had to stay inside the school. We could not come out to little school to play. But Shreveport was a little bit different. They had big schools, but they had what you call it? They had guards around them, and we could had big schools there. Had good teachers, had more than one grade, because we can have one grade at the others, and that was just a speller and a reader. So that's why I like the education better in California than I did in Louisiana. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I've learned so much about the past, and history has become real for me.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Greater Ebenezer. As you just heard from Sister Johnson, Reverend Pittman, and Sister Williams, the conditions down south in the 1950s were marked by a plethora of hardships, struggles with schooling, inequitable employment, and unsafe conditions. These factors led to the Second Great Migration, where hundreds of thousands of Black people moved from the Deep South to the West Coast to pursue better opportunities with employment, housing, and schooling. While the opportunities and conditions in California were much better than the South, they were far from perfect. Racism was veiled but still present, and tensions in Los Angeles could be high, as they were during the Watts riots and the Rodney King riots. Over the last 60 years, things have gotten better, and there's still more work to be done. In recent years, our people have struggled with police brutality and voting rights, to name just a few of the issues. Black History Month should be used as an opportunity to celebrate how far we have come and to acknowledge how far we have to go. Young people, remember, the push for equity and equality for Black people continues with you. As you strive for this, remember what the Bible says in Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. God bless you.